Yeah,
I
so
kind
any stories? Go ahead.
I kind of have a little story. Um, no, I didn't get to the senior center again, but I've lived in my community, this apartment complex, for 28 years, and I've seen it in its worst, and I've seen it at its best. Several years ago, I was asked to be on the board of directors for the company that owns this property and several others as a resident representative to the board. Due to malfeasance and misappropriations of funds, we've been in a lot of trouble. And I was very concerned for just not myself, but for all the 4,100 residents that we have, that we're going to lose our homes. And the person who was responsible didn't care.
Hmm.
And this is all, it would be, maybe it might be okay if you could afford better housing, but this is for people who, it's affordable housing. So we don't have a lot of money and we just can't up and move. So this past week, uh, thanks to the diligence of several of us on the board, we welcomed in our new executive director and a few other people who are going to put us back on the right track. So I'm saying this to say that I've been going around talking to residents, trying to reassure them that everything's going to be okay. We're going to be fine. We even have a new property management company that came in, and I've met with them. We're going to be fine. And I'm asking that God continues to bless me to be able to uplift those of us who are scared, who are still scared. And he's got to help me find a way to convince him it's okay.
Hmm.
So it's a work in progress. But what gets me is how I believe, well, I know that God knew a long time ago that all this stuff was going to happen. And
Mm.
so the right people in the right place at the right time, and he opened doors for us. And my only thing is I got to ask him to help me with this, because the lady who took all our money, every board meeting, is she in jail yet? And he said, Irvinel, calm down. We're working on it. I want her in jail today. And they said, no, Irvinel, that's not how it works. I don't care how it works. Put her butt in jail. And I don't say but put her in jail. And I need God's help with that one. I need to calm down
Mm.
and let him do his job. But
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
for me where God has been this week.
Yeah. Interacting with your neighbors about their anxiety and worry as a person who knows that God's in control, and then also dealing with your own anger and desire for justice. Thanks for sharing. Other stories as people were engaged in mission this last week?
I'll just do quick. Yesterday we had mommy's class here again. And so for the first time, all these moms have these little bitty tiny babies, or they may be up to like 3 years old. They're just little kids. And they've all, just kind of been trying to learn their way around here and stuff. But every one of those babies and kids met me with these gigantic smiles when they saw me. And it just made my day. That's all.
Absolutely. That's it. Yeah,
That
that's
was
good.
wonderful.
I mean, I see God in that because that doesn't
Mhm.
always happen. I mean, you probably do have that face where all the babies like you, but it doesn't always happen. And so it means something for those connections, right? With those moms.
Oh yeah, those moms are amazed, They tell me that they don't do that just a whole lot of the time. And they were afraid when they first came, but they're sweet, sweet, sweet. And they've got a nursery here where they're just charmed by the nursery workers. They sleep, they hold them and they sleep and they play. It's just really neat. So they like coming now.
Yep. Kids are such a powerful way to connect, because if there's trust and the kids feel safe, and it just makes everything open up in such a powerful way. It's so true.
I'll
Anybody
share
else?
next. Mine's
go
a
ahead.
little all over the place, which is kind of seemed out. So my focus was just kind of praying this week, and I guess I wanted to just share, I think, where the Lord's just revealing some connections, I guess, more than anything. So we had a great talk, Ray and I did, with Irvinell after last week's session, and just a connection with Irvinell with the video that we had watched with this shared table, H.E. Buck Foundation shared table, and Chris Herring, who's doing a lot of similar work as Irvinell in I guess on some boards in San Antonio. So, and then we had a follow-up to the leaders of that shared table yesterday, that Ray was also a part of. And I also think it's kind of cool that through the shared table is how I am here with this group, and knowing Ray now. But I guess I met another person, April, who's a leader who's going to be going to this luncheon tomorrow, and she reached out and said, let's get together. She has a passion for the South, folks on the South. Ray's working with some communities in the North, and me, I live in the South side, but working on the East. So it's just really cool to me then to have met April now. We're going to get together and have talks, and then had a great conversation with Gabrielle, who leads the shared table effort. And I've been working with her or sharing with her for some time now. And she called me after the session yesterday. We just had a really good conversation, because I think her heart is being led to maybe some more work on the East Side. And I think I'm a restless person, so it was just good. She's like, the things that your passions for East Side collaboration are not like the Lord's listening, and it's gonna continue when I move, because that's kind of what's been heavy on my heart. So I think, and then I had said goodbye, or not goodbye, but I told the Young Life students who I work with that I was going to be moving. I hadn't told them that, and I got teary, and it was just I kind of was able to share with them my passion for community building, and that I see that there's so much hope in the work that they are doing already as college students at St. Philip's College. And went to club yesterday, and they had the St. Philip's College Fair, and just dancing, and just so much fun, and meeting some really neat people, and seeing how the Young Life students they were dancing alongside the police officers, all doing line dances, and it was just really beautiful. And then after club, one of the young ladies from Young Life had invited me to her senior volleyball game, and we got a whole group of Young Life students to go to the game and just cheering her on. And it's just, I guess what I'm seeing is this beautiful community that the Lord's building with all of you all and the people that I'm meeting, and just kind of seeing all these crossovers. I'm just going to ask Irvinell, maybe we'll have a discussion afterward again, if you know Vanessa Rodriguez. She's in a similar situation with the housing, so I would love to connect you with that. But the Lord's just bringing people into my life who are just in different places, and I'm a huge connector, so I love to just be a part of the people and the connections, and just playing my little small part within that. So just thankful that the Lord's answering my prayers, and just me feeling reassured, I guess, with these beautiful communities that I'm seeing.
Amen. And just that it's so big that you start out sometimes focused on one area, thinking maybe this will be one thing we can kind of work on here. And then God said, actually, I want you to see this. I want you to see this like different level up. Who knows why, for your next season of life. God wants you to see it this way, but it's a gift. It's a gift nonetheless. All right, we might have some more time for stories. I want to talk about storytelling a little bit in this group as a tool for mission. Storytelling as a tool for discernment in mission, but also as a tool for engaging our relationships in mission beyond the walls of the church. And then when we come back together, we'll process that a little bit. And then if there are other quick updates people want to make to what's going on in the communities they're serving, when we do our mini experiments at the end, you're welcome to kind of share that a little bit. But let me share my screen and we'll talk a little bit about storytelling some more. I think storytelling is so important for so many reasons. I've got 10 of them here. Got 10 reasons. Can you see my screen? Okay. So I think sometimes we might take for granted the biggest, most important part of this, and that is that we serve a living God who is actively moving for good in the world and has included us and the people we're around in that work, right? So we are engaging in God's mission. And we're talking about the God who created heaven and earth. We're talking about the God who will bring all things into fullness. The God who saves, the God who is a part of all the stories of old. And we're a part of that in real time. And I think sometimes, I don't know exactly all the reasons, maybe it's out of a desire to be humble or to not try to make it spectacular, but we sometimes downplay that our stories. And I think instead we need to elevate our stories and the weight that they have, because if we believe the living God is working and we're engaging that, we have a story to tell. I mean, Jesus says, be my witnesses. And a witness is somebody who experiences something firsthand and then is able to tell from their perspective, from their unique perspective, what they see God doing, which is such a different way of approaching how to talk about God than laying out what somebody else should do or laying out what someone should believe or how they should act. But simply being a witness means, oh, I saw this. I experienced this from your firsthand account. And obviously we're story people as Christians, people of the book, which is mostly stories. Jesus exemplified storytelling quite a bit in his ministry. But I also love the kind of neurological and anthropological look at storytelling. I've been diving deep on this. I'm teaching a group of pastors in October. Actually, the week off that we're taking, I'll be in Chicago teaching about storytelling. And very clearly, our species is unique because of stories. So no other species can tell a story. And I mean, we can communicate with like apes and different animals and things like that, but our ability to create worlds is arguably what really makes us in the image of God, right? It's not whether or not we have fur. It's not whether or not we do things we think are human. We build worlds with our words and with our imaginations, and then we become a part of those worlds together. And so we live in systems and we all agree, even though we argue, we mostly agree in this story and our role in it. And so stories are the primary way that our brains organize our sense of reality and our worldview. That's the primary way. It's not through a bullet list like this. It's not through a textbook. It's through stories, because that's how we hold complex things together, is in story. And then stories also give us our own role. They help us understand what is our function, what is our role, what are the boundaries in this story for me. And so stories are extremely powerful. Jesus knew this. The writers of Scripture know this. And yet we kind of, in the church generally, besides maybe the task of preaching, we tend to not talk about the importance of storytelling. The other thing stories do is, in and of themselves, they create connection between the storyteller and the story hearer. So when you hear someone tell a story, particularly a personal story, your brain is like shooting off all of these connective synapses. You're connecting to the person, you're watching their face, you're listening to the tone of their voice. God made us to engage stories and to connect to each other through stories. And we've been doing this since we've been human. And so it creates relationship. And I mean, I don't know what your take is on this. My sense as a pastor, someone growing up in the church my whole life, is that Christians tend to not really feel like storytellers. Like, we don't feel like we know how, or that we practice telling stories, particularly from a God perspective, from a faith perspective. We instead say, oh, you're a good storyteller, I'm not a good storyteller, you know. So some people tell stories, others don't. And we often don't connect storytelling to faith. And so that's another reason why we need to do this. Stories, the other thing, this is so key right now. So we're like just, what is it, a month away from an election? And what stories do, and again, Jesus clearly knew this, they transcend the kind of talking points and debate. A story resists being simplified into these who's in and who's out, who's wrong, who's right. Stories are very nuanced. There's a lot of gray, and stories aren't meant to be, even though we try to do this, even with Jesus's stories, we try to go, what's the bullet point? What's the one thing? And Jesus is like, those who have ears, let them hear, right? Stories have this way of transcending all that mess that divides us and still getting to real life issues. So that's why stories are so powerful, because we can engage a neighbor or somebody beyond the walls of the church that doesn't share our faith or our politics or whatever else, our race, our background. And the story allows us to engage one another in a way that talking points and labels do not allow us to connect. In fact, they divide us. And then we just are living in a culture right now where stories are like billion-dollar industries, right? Stories are making billions of dollars, proving the point that we're story people. We want stories, and we're starving for better stories. We're looking for the good stories, and I think we all would agree we have a story, the big picture meta story, but then our lives are part of these little stories. Finally, stories are this universal language, so it really is it's a myth, or it's a problem to say that some people can tell stories and others can't. We all have the ability to tell stories, even if we can't speak. I know there are some limits in some of that. It's amazing the ability with our nonverbals. Have you ever had someone who doesn't speak the same language as you, or is unable to speak, and still is able to communicate feelings or get some kind of message across? We have so many ways to be able to break barriers through storytelling. Okay. Before we really get into this, let me see, what time is it? Yeah, let me take a break here. Why do you think storytelling is an important tool for mission in particular? Storytelling in terms of engaging God's world beyond the church, beyond the walls of the church. Why is storytelling, based on some of those things or other thoughts you have, an important tool for mission?
I think it's disarming. And I think of people giving their testimonies. Testimony is a story. It's not Bible thumping someone or intimidating them, somebody who may have had a bad experience with the faith, or just, be closed in whatever way. If you're just telling a story, you're telling your story. It's a story that you said, like God reveals to you. It's your story. Who can, it's disarming. Like it's like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Well, here's my story. But it's a conversation. And I think it's non-threatening.
Yep. So to take a little we're at a time in a moment where a lot of mission is not non-threatening. I mean, for a lot of people, mission is very threatening. Either for, I actually think a lot of church people are afraid to engage in conversation with neighbors around faith. They feel threatened, like, oh, I'm going to offend, or I'm going to push away, or I'm going to whatever. Not to mention everyone who might have had a bad experience with the church, or has heard from their friends or others, or the culture. So yeah, non-threatening is a big deal. Other reasons why storytelling is a great tool for mission.
Pastor Ray, people in the church don't want to share the stories with each other, much less people outside the
Right?
church.
I agree with that. I agree that we struggle sharing our stories with each other.
And like Melinda said, it's your testimony. I've been trying to encourage people at my church. I said, everybody has a testimony. You have a testimony. You're sitting in this church house right now because you have a testimony. What brought you here? But nobody wants to talk about it. And I said, Pastor Ray called me the person who preaches spontaneously. Don't get me preaching up in this church house, y'all. So, but they still don't want to share their story. So how can we get them to share the story outside the church if they don't want to do it inside the church?
Yep. I think the church is a place to practice. It's a place we should be practicing our storytelling. Anybody else?
I think just maybe to add on to that, Urbana, I think something my husband and I, we are a bit more, I guess, liberal than some of the folks at our church, and just kind of having some of these tough conversations. And I think asking questions and actually this is something in the shared table notes, that like, instead of feeling defensive or kind of questioning, well, why would they think that? That's, even in your head, to be inquisitive and to ask questions like, wow, I hadn't thought of that. And I think of Kelly Corrigan, like, tell me more. So I've been working a lot on like trying to be a better listener. So I think asking questions is also a way. It's getting somebody else to tell their story and then to understand their perspective. And I remember Oprah Winfrey did this with like Democrat, Republican, or pro-Trump, anti-Trump, and, just bringing some very different views together that were very, just tense, and just, getting them to tell their stories. So I think the questions and not just jumping right on the, this is what I think, but that's something that's been really, and there's some subjects that you kind of may have to avoid, but it's, I think within the church and outside of the church, it's really beautiful to just listen to different people's perspectives and really try and understand, like, what you may not inside be able to understand, but have that curiosity.
So let's talk a little bit about some foundations for, well, can you see that? Nope.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, not yet. There it is.
Okay. So here are some of the keys to a foundation of a story. And I want to be really clear that kind of what Urbana was just saying, we tend to be very intimidated by storytelling when we think a story needs to be, I don't know, spectacular. It needs to be dramatic. It needs to be awe-inducing or inspiring. It needs to be entertaining. It needs to have twists and turns. It needs to have events that are shocking or something, And I know as a pastor who, tries to tell stories in sermons, I always felt that temptation, how do I entertain? How do I keep attention? How do I, you know what I mean? And I've really changed, and as I've learned about storytelling, even as people have given me feedback about what they remember about stories, it's not the events of the story. It's not the It's not the timeline of the story. It's something else, and I want to get into that. So one of the first things we are responsible for when we are telling a story, and it's not just an anecdote anymore, is discerning meaning for ourselves. This is so key. We're not discerning universal meaning. That's not the point. We're not trying to come up with, when something happens in our life, and I'm going to just use the examples you've given me today, right? So when Becky goes and the children look at her with joy at the mom's group, and then the moms say, that doesn't usually happen. It's rare for them to be this happy with a stranger or someone new. It's Becky's job to start making meaning about that for herself. She can't make meaning for that for the babies or for the moms, but she can make meaning for that for herself. And when you begin to get some meaning, and this is also key, our discovery of meaning is dynamic. Have you ever read a story in the Bible and it's grown in its meaning from the last time you read it? Same story, new meaning. And the same thing is with our story. So we don't need to have all the meaning. We don't need to have the highest level of meaning. We just need meaning, something it means to us. That's the difference between an anecdote and a story. An anecdote just tells something, and really you're kind of wondering, so what? But a story has the answer to the so what, at least for you. Right?
Mhm.
So we have to do a little bit of work, and this is why prayer is important, like the prayer of examine, is we're trying to find out, God, what's going on here? And sometimes the meaning of our story is that we are dysregulated or confused or standing in mystery. It could be that the story that we experienced actually just brought us to a place of unknowing. But we can still tell that as meaningful if we are people, for instance, who get anxious when we don't know, or who going into unknowing is difficult or a challenge. Your story needs to have some level of vulnerability. And what's so cool about this is every one of us has different standards of vulnerability. I would say I'm one of these people. I tend to be somebody on the more self-revealing type. There are others who, for them to tell about their middle name is like, whoa, we reached a really deep point with you. You told me your middle name. And so the cool thing is people can actually intuitively kind of feel when you've been vulnerable, and there's not a universal standard on what's vulnerable. Does that make sense? So it's not like for me something to be vulnerable and for Diana to be vulnerable. Our brains are actually developed. God made us to be able to tell that was vulnerable for them. Do you know what I'm saying? So like you can tell, oh, that was vulnerable. That was hard for them. They just crossed the threshold telling me that, even though I might have done that more easily or whatever. So it's super important that for you at your level, there is when you tell a story, are giving a gift to someone, and you're taking a risk because you're offering yourself and you're offering your vulnerability. And that vulnerability is the power of engagement in that story, not how dramatic the different events of the story are. Does that make sense? So your story could be very powerful because of the movement of you sharing, not just based on how many explosions there were and how much the special effects cost. So that leads to like, there have to be some stakes. And so I'm going to pick on Becky again because it's at the top of our minds. But I'm trying to think of what the stakes were for you, Becky. There's a chance anytime you look at a baby that they are going to start crying at you. There's a chance anytime you talk to a child that they are going to run away from you. And so I don't know. I'm not trying to tell your story. I'm trying to think of it for myself, maybe there's some stakes, some risk in that relationship. Those could be stakes we take that are internal. Maybe they're external in that relationship. Maybe there's a physical risk for us to go be out in mission, like maybe by looking like we look and being the person we are, that takes a particular amount of risk. But whenever we talk about the stakes, then we are opening ourselves up. And interestingly, when people are hearing us talk about the stakes in that vulnerability, they are naturally going to be drawn in if they're social people at all. And then finally, as small as we might think it is, our stories usually have some part of transformation. That's supposed to be a chrysalis there. I don't know what it looks like to you in my image, but it's a cocoon. There's something changes. Some change takes place. And it's that change, it's that arc from where we started to where we ended up. And again, I want to emphasize, we are not finished because of that one little story, but some maybe incremental change happens and we can tell that story. That is what makes a good story. Vulnerability, stakes, a meaning, and transformation. And it can be any of the stories that we've shared here in the stuff we do on just a week by week basis. Those, when they have those elements, you have the foundation for a story that has power. So let's talk about that. What do y'all think? What thoughts come to you? What questions? What wonderings?
All I can think about when you're talking about storytelling and vulnerability is Mr. Rogers. But like that's a testimony to how that's true. Like we have like this real life example of someone that's like there's I can't remember exactly what it is. It's like a hearing where he's like before like the Senate or something talking about like public funding for the radio. And he just he wasn't being dramatic. He wasn't like this passionate like public speaker. He just was vulnerable and honest. And the House or who, the group of politicians he was talking to were like, we are deeply moved by what you just said. And like there wasn't like special magic. It wasn't because he's a great speaker. It's like he was just willing to be vulnerable and honest.
Mm-hmm. I think by defining good storytelling differently, hopefully in some ways that we just talked about, it gives more people the permission to be themselves as storytellers instead of saying, oh, I've got to be like so-and-so. I've got to be louder, more flashy, more engaging, more whatever. No, that's not what makes a good story. So thank you for that. Other thoughts?
I just want to say, I love that example, Spencer, because I think about that even with children. Like they didn't think that his show would be successful either because it was just so simple. It was just
on paper, you're like, what's great about this?
Like puppets, and he's putting on his sweater and his shoes.
Right, you're like, all right, he takes his shoes off. Okay, like where's this going?
The slowness and he invited children, adults, and he took society through, like the bathing, washing his feet in the kiddie tub with the Black police officer, during really, he was not afraid, or dealing with death with kids. He walked them through, really our whole society through, in such a simple way. So I love that example. I think, it's just got so many applications he just told stories and was vulnerable and real with the world. So really beautiful.
I do think it's important to, and I consider this group one of those places where we're simply practicing storytelling. We just give a few minutes, 10, 12 minutes for a few people. We might not all get to share a story, to tell a story and to listen to stories and to mine the story for its meaning to us, right? And to maybe get better at knowing where there was a risk for us or where there was transformation for us in that story. And then I think a lot of times we can tell those stories again. Other people need to hear them. Irvinel, I'm putting you on the spot, but when you think about why people don't share their testimony in church, why people don't do that, don't feel comfortable with that, does any of what we said put a finger on why they might not? Is it the vulnerability piece? Is it that they don't know how to talk about transformation?
I think, and you kind of hit on it, they don't feel that their story is dynamic enough.
Mhm.
And so why would it impress anybody? Because I remember my best friend's mother. I asked her what was her testimony, and she said, I don't have one. I said, what do you mean? You believe in God, you're at church every Sunday, you're doing all this stuff. She said, but that's something I've always done, and I've always loved the Lord. And I said, but that's, to me, that was a testimony. But she didn't see it that way because it was not flash, boom, Jesus appeared to me in a dream and all this kind of stuff. And so therefore it wasn't really a testimony. So, and I'm like, if it brings you to Christ, I don't care if you saw his face on the trash can lid and gave your life to Christ. That's your testimony. And he caught you where you were at that moment. And you're gonna make me start preaching. Okay, stop. So
Well, you're bringing up that maybe we have not reflected on our own stories enough, and we have not had others help us to see, or helped allow the Spirit to help us to see where our stories are stories of transformation. And I do think when preaching and when people who get up on with microphones on a stage talk, we go, oh, well, that I can't do that. Maybe.
yeah, and that's probably it. Because they asked me, well, what's your story? And I said, well, I'm gonna start telling you, but we'll be here till tomorrow. And they asked me why, and I said, because it's an ongoing testimony. It's not just one thing that happened at one time. It happens over a course of my lifetime that keeps me where I am rooted in him. Not just where I started being rooted, but keeps me rooted. And they said they never thought of it that way. I said, anything that keeps you rooted in him, what started you there and gets you there and keeps you there, that's your testimony. That's what we need to talk about. And I tell them also, I said, we want to fill up the pews in the church. I said, I get that. But what if the day comes that we can't worship in a church? Are you telling your children your testimony so that they have something to keep with them and to help them go forward? Because let's say all our doors are locked and we can't go in. How are we going to keep on worshiping? Are we going to give it up? Nobody
think-
sees.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I just was thinking, like, I love this discussion about testimonies because when I was a part of a Bible study way back when I was infant Christian, and it was just our small group of couples, and people giving their testimonies was the first time like I thought like, oh, I guess I do have a story to tell. So I think whether it's small group Bible study or then my church in DC, we had to write out our testimonies to be elders and deacons in the church. Our pastors shared theirs, not like pulpit from the pulpit, but just intimately at men's gatherings, at the women's gatherings, in smaller groups, and modeled that. And I think modeling the vulnerability, because they did talk about hard stuff like, addictions and pornography and, struggles that they might have had. The youth group that my kids were a part of, same thing. It was modeled on mission trips that they like, who wants to share their testimony. And so I think that modeling from top level, whether it's a small group or certainly from pastors, is really beautiful. And church we're going to now, same thing at the men's group. We have and the women's, separate gatherings that are smaller, more intimate. That storytelling, that are giving testimonies. And it's kind of funny, both our DC church and the church here, it's the men who are usually afraid to be more vulnerable. To me, it seems, they're the ones that are like every month they have, their, men's dinners, and testimony is a huge part of it. So I think that's beautiful to be modeled in these small group settings, or that we can also model. We
Right.
can just that was one thing that meant a lot to me, and I hadn't seen that in the church here, and come to find out the woman who planned it just had been sick, so they hadn't done it since I had been attending. But I said, I can help with that. Let's plan another one. And we've done 2 since then. It's a beautiful way. And the woman who plans it, she wants it in somebody's home so that it's intimate, and she gets older and younger, very, purposeful. And like you said, Irvin, not the flashy, but just, stories. So I just think it's a beautiful way to witness and to encourage others, by example.
Well, maybe that for this week, your mini experiment, one, if you don't have something else in mind already directly, is just to say, where might I tell a story? Who can I practice with? Because that's how we get better at anything, is by practicing. And it may be a spouse, it may be someone in the church, back to Irvinell's point about this is where we're supposed to get good at this. And it may be someone in our community, because ultimately, and when we come back around to storytelling, we'll talk about the importance of storytelling in our community. Yeah, that's an option. So let's move into that for our last 8 minutes. If you want to check in, where are you with your mini experiment work, and where are you going this coming week with your mini experiment?
I was able to have lunch with the campus pastor at Shriner. It was a good lunch. It was cool. He's from South Korea, and he's very formal and very polite. And so like probably the first 3/4 of the lunch was like, I don't know, for me it was difficult, because it was like, dude, like we're having like can we take off your business hat? You know what I mean? Like let's be friends hat, and that takes time and you can't rush that. But for like the last like 20 minutes or so, we started joking and laughing and stuff. And so I feel like I'm gaining like an actual, like more than just a work colleague, more than just like a work partnership type of dynamic with him. And so I broke my foot a few weeks ago, and I've been hobbling around, and we were talking about our wives and how we met and stuff. And he was telling me their story, and his wife does acupuncture. And he was like, we would love to like have you over at the house. And my wife, I don't know if you've ever done acupuncture or think it's, worth doing, but she's working on getting her credentials for Texas. She has it in California. That's where like they went to school and stuff. And so he was like, we'd love to offer that and just take it or leave it. And I was kind of like, man, that'd be like I immediately was convicted, and I was like, well, I know I'm gonna bring up where I'm praying and struggling, and like my plan for this next meeting, because I don't like needles. I don't like things poking me. I had to go to some therapy to be able to be in the hospital when my wife was giving birth to our children, like to be able to be in the room and conscious. And so like the idea of like, I'm just gonna like this is like a relation, like saying, yeah, sure, you can help me do this thing to my ankle. Like is that's like a big step, to just like accept an offering, like a help offering, just to build further a relationship. So that's kind of that's I'm gonna keep wrestling with that and see where I end up with that. See if I can accept that offer and how it can further our friendship.
Wow. Oh, there's a whole parable in there. When a friend offers you a gift that scares the heck out of you. Wow. All right. So
I've done, Spencer, I've done acupuncture before and it's awesome. I've done it for migraines and a lot of things. So it's yeah, I would encourage you to try it. It's pretty amazing, actually. They so know the pressure points and what's connected to what in the bodies. It's pretty amazing. Do some research. Maybe that'll kind of help you feel a little more comfortable with it. They're teeny tiny little needles. So
They're not like the needles you find at your doctor's office. So
no, they're
She's
so
about to pass
small.
out right now, y'all. Just you're talking about it more, and I can see
Ray knows.
there's
Ray
color
knows
in
me
his
enough to
face.
like.
All right, who else? Thank you, Spencer. Who else has a mini experiment they've done or going to do? Give us an update.
I went out and met with a 41-year-old gentleman that's in inpatient drug and alcohol treatment in the Hill Country. I had been asked to go out by his drug and alcohol treatment counselor. He has a lot of physical limitations, and he's going blind. He's almost completely blind. He came from the San Antonio area where he was homeless, and fortunately for him, in San Antonio, you guys have pretty good public UT Health Science Center and the university system. And so there I had a lot of medical evidence to work with. I'm up to about 600 or 700 pages so far. But what I you know what strikes me in the moment is that I will be I will have a snapshot moment in this young man's life as I have, I think most of you know, my career in life was I was a disability claims rep for the Social Security Administration, and part of that time was also work in voc rehab of getting people back to work who were disabled. So compress all that time down into just this moment with this gentleman, and I'm going to have very little time because he'll be discharged soon to go back out on the street. At this point, he doesn't have a place to stay yet. But what I took from it in my time with him is that I felt God's presence in my ability to be assuring to him that there is a way forward as far as getting, his case before someone at I've already gotten the case before someone that's going to determine his blindness, but also I could feel God's presence in my ability to assure him that I believed in his ability to stabilize his life. I believed that he could be more functional than he is. And I believed that I do believe this is not pie in the sky. I believe he can do some type of work again, probably not full time, but I believe that with the proper accommodations and training through blindness services, that something is, that his life can be more hopeful. Now,
Can
that's
you give us your next mini experiment in about 20 seconds?
my next experiment
Yes.
will be to return to hopefully speak with him one more time before he goes back out on the street or wherever he's going next, and to to see how God is moving in his life and in my life from being involved with him.
Amen. I'm so glad that y'all made that connection. You're both blessed by it. Thank you, Diana. Sorry to cut you off. I just want to make sure. Anyone else have a mini experiment they're headed toward and have come from?
I'm meeting with the principal at our grade school that's very close to us. It's a part of our mission here at the church, but it's the first time I've done that. And so it's gonna be, I'm just kind of excited to do that and see. That's been our thing that we're gonna do, you know, as a church, is to work with the 2 schools in our community. So
Big deal. Lord be with you.
thank you.
All right, Melinda or Irvinel, any mini experiment coming up?
Just, I guess I kind of went through a lot of different things that I've been,
Mhm.
that God's been revealing, but I had a meeting this week with the gentleman, who's one of the table leaders actually at the shared table, Chris Parker, and also the lead for our Kingdom Restoration Lab that works with the homeless out of our church. And he's starting a nonprofit to try and help fill gaps between, like, when people get vouchers or whatever and they get a first home or a home, but they don't have furniture or they need mental health. Just he kind of is in tune to a lot of the different people within that system. So I helped him put together a flyer this week. And I think my mini experiment is just, actually Gabrielle told me about a different resource care. Yeah, Care Portal works. I say it in this group because I've heard, like, you don't need to start another nonprofit. There's so much out there, and I know there is. So I guess with Gabrielle mentioning that, I want to kind of circle back around with Chris to say, I think he knows a lot of people. He is the right person to make the connections within this community, but maybe not creating his own website, and kind of, he already starting the process of a nonprofit. That's a lot of work to, that he's putting on himself. So maybe connecting him. So I just want to have some follow-on conversations. If he has suggestions of that
Nice.
kind of fill the gaps between organizations, resources that, if you're not a part of a specific community like Habitat for Humanity that they support. So let me know offline, but I want to follow back up with Chris at least about this Care Portal works, and reach out to the gentleman who runs that within San Antonio. So there's a national org. So yeah, just prayers and on kind of that connection that I'd like to follow up on.
I love it. Anything for you, Irvinel? I'm sorry, we're going over time.
Right now, I don't have anything specific planned, but I am working with 2 families trying to get them into affordable housing, which is something they didn't know that they were possibly able to get into. So I'm working with them now through my connections with the company I work for, or I'm on the board with. So that's where my efforts are going this week.
Let me say a prayer. God, you know us. You're with us. You're the one leading us. And so we ask that you would take us by the hand and lead us, not only for our own transformation and growth and healing in you, but because we know you're seeking to make us whole, but that as you do that good work in us, that good work would happen around us for others and for the communities that you love, the people that you care about. So we go in your name, oh God. We go with the power of our baptism, the power of your Holy Spirit sending us in your name. We pray. Amen.
Amen.
Y'all are amazing. Thank you for everything you're doing. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.